On September 3rd of 2018, we were given the last chapter of the magical land of Oo and its inhabitants. A final curtain to be drawn for these amazing characters that we lived with, laughed with, sang with, cried with, and grew up with for the last 8 years. Or is it? As sad as I am to see Adventure Time go with its brilliant scripting, strong topics, and impressive characters both in voice talent and writing, I'm glad that Cartoon Network didn't pull any of that mid-2000s ball honkery, watering down the show to make it into generic crap like junk food television, nor just dropping the show like UPS does with my packages. We get a legitimate end to the animation, and what an end it was. Beautiful, epic, and amazing, all squashed into one, like those sushi rolls you get at cheap Japanese restaurants. It gave us a lot of closure on the characters and what happens to them, like Tiffany, Maja the Witch, and even the Jiggler all the way from episode 6. This might be the end of Finn and Jake's journeys, but it might not be the end of Oo. As is par for the writers of Adventure Time, every question they answer, they just create 3 more, and the finale makes no exceptions. It's with all these open-ended questions that there is a high chance for a sequel. All of the pieces are there. You got 2 new main characters, Shermie and Beth, who have their own personalities, strengths, and weaknesses. Not to mention, Beth is the pup princess, meaning there's a pup kingdom we could see a lot of. Though according to the official wiki, she is now an enemy of the pup kingdom, so it's possible she'll be constantly fighting off attacks from them. And with the new show also taking place far into the future, things will have changed in Oo. New monsters and creatures, new magic, new technology, and new lore. There's so much potential for new things, as well as explaining some of the holes of the story. Like, I might have been wrong at first with the crown, as it turned out Gunther becomes the next Ice King, but I am still rather curious how Gunther went from king to thing. Huh, that sounded like one of those Get Fit videos. Go from thing to king with only 30 minutes a day! Anyway, it could have been a long-term effect of the jewel being removed from the crown that caused Gunther to transform into this more bird-like creature. As I said before, Ice King never changed for 1,000 years, so why did Gunther? Here's another example. What happened to Martin when he was taken away by the Catalyst Comet? What sort of strange life is he living among the stars? Then there's the question of how he even got into space to begin with, let alone imprisoned at the Citadel. And then there's Fiona and Cake, which during the episode Fiona, Cake, and Fiona, it was confirmed that they're actually real somewhere in another dimension. The Ice King getting their stories beamed directly into his head this entire time. So we could see the other side of Shermie and Beth, and knowing the writers, it'd be something like Sherry and Bert. Patience is still out there somewhere after she froze herself again. She could even still be in her elemental form if she's protected from LSP's powers back in the Elementals arc, so she could come back in some way, perhaps as an antagonist and reveal the new elements. Cuber, who we know is from the future time period, could actually talk to Shermie and Beth, telling them about Graybles. We could even learn more about him, where he comes from and what he even is. The now giant baby Sweet Pea could have lots of stories to tell about Finn and Jake. He may even have been trained by Finn to become a hero. We see him carrying around Finn's old nightsword Peppermint Butler made for him, except now it's huge just like he is. There were also the candy probes that were sent out into space by Bubblegum and Tree Trunks' alien friends in episode High Strangeness. We could see a new planet with candy people on it. In fact, maybe that's where some of the candy people went, up in rockets, perhaps to escape whatever cataclysmic event happened. We did see one of those aliens as a princess in the time skip, so that lands it some credit that the candy probes actually made it. And what about Gumbald? It's not so cut and dry with his intentions before he was stupefied again. Was he actually going to use the Dum Dum Juice secretly on PB, having never learned anything from his shared nightmare? Or did Aunt Lolly plant it on him in order to take out her revenge? The juice was in his back pocket and not his front when he tripped. Plus, if he knew that the Dum Dum Juice bottle broke, wouldn't he have been smart enough to throw it away instead of bringing it to his face? Then there's my biggest concern. What happened to the Candy Kingdom? We never really got an answer for how the kingdom fell. From what we see in Lemon Hope Part 2, the candy people get really far in their scientific advances. Judging from the space-aged vehicles scattered around the place, it didn't gradually decline either. It was very sudden. Perhaps something cataclysmic happened just like the Mushroom War with humankind. Then there's the towering Gumball Guardians, known as the Prize Ball Guardians, wandering around. The candy people trapped inside small containers in its overly sized head. They appear to be in some form of suspended animation, like Kyrosleep. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say another war started, or some other form of event drove Bubblegum to make a decision. In this case, she either saved her candy people by putting them into the Guardians so they could be unharmed, or PB went a little crazy over the years and put them in these giants to protect them. I lean more towards the former, but knowing how cautious the princess can get, it's not beyond her to do something like this. Speaking of Bubblegum, she could also still be alive somewhere. It's not just those giant candy robots keeping the people safe. We saw in the final episode that she also has the Banana Guard 500s protecting the Guardian. This one, however, sports 2 heads instead of 1 the original series had. Does that mean there's something special about them? So many questions revolve around Princess Bubblegum and her kingdom, since her fall remains the biggest unexplained mystery. All of this, and I haven't even touched on the intro of the episode, Come Along With Me, that leaves a huge amount of questions too, as well as leaving a lot of openings for adventures and stories to take place. I'll have to pick it apart scene by scene just to show you what I mean. In the first second, we're introduced to what appears to be the Ice Kingdom, and the first thing that flashes by is a window with prison bars made of ice. Taking a closer look reveals that somebody is inside holding onto those bars. Maybe the Ice Thing kidnaps princesses just like the Ice King of old. He could also be kidnapping dogs from the Pup Kingdom. The Ice Thing doesn't seem the most mentally stable, so anything is possible. We quickly move on to see a mysterious figure dressed in such thick, warm clothing that we can't even see the color of their skin nor their face. And they're riding on the stone duck we see back in episode Evicted. There's a possibility of it actually being Bubblegum spying on the nearby Pup Kingdom that's shown later on. They do seem to have the same body type, and she was always one to keep her eyes on everything that happened around her. I'm not so sure why though she would be here instead of taking care of her ruined kingdom. Another thing about this person is the object they're holding. If we go frame by frame, we find that there's a symbol on the telescope. Unfortunately, there's no information on this mountain-shaped emblem. I never heard of it being in the show before, and I couldn't find anything about it online. I guess it kinda looks like the alchemical symbol for air at best? Judging by its placement, it was put there specifically for a reason. It's stuff like this that gives my theory credit. If you're ending the show, why put something new in without giving any explanation? Is it a logo for some other kingdom? A magical design? Or is it just some Easter egg placed in there by one of the staff? Flying past the unknown watcher and through a crumbling ice pillar, we come back to the Ice Thing, cackling away on an icy perch. He flies away towards a big futuristic looking city that has a very suspicious symbol that looks very eerily to Gumball's G that he used during his rise of power. Shot moves swiftly through the arches and a gate with a strange icon that looks like a dog's eye. Possibly a camera, judging from the security. Quickly flying up the cityscape, we see a blue dog with his head popping out a window, and from his appearance, he looks like one of Jake's ancient descendants. Panning past the blue dog rainicorn hybrid, we see more information on how advanced this civilization is, as a spaceship flies away to the sky bearing the same G symbol as before. Following that ship upwards, we come to a hovering crystal platform holding yet another hybrid, this one being white and scraggly looking. As most of you have observed, this dog doesn't have both of his eyes. The left is a square-shaped red crystal instead. If that gem looks familiar to you, it should. It's the one that popped free from the crown in the episode Come Along With Me. According to the official wiki, this is actually Gibbon, the future child of Charlie we see only once in the episode Daddy-Daughter Card Wars. And yes, he's almost 1,000 years old thanks to that gem in his eye that gives him similar powers to the Ice King, which would explain the G floating everywhere around the city and why there's a gem stuck in the center of the symbol. Later on, he is seen shooting pink lightning bolts that look very similar to the Ice King's blue ones, and also seems to be holding a staff that looks like it's created out of ice, lending credit to the Ice Gem's abilities. The wiki says that he's actually the leader of the pups, and has been their king for a long time. That magical eye might also be affecting his mind, making him more of a tyrant type leader, which would be a good reason why he's scared of Beth taking the kingdom away from him. We also see that he's standing on a crystal-like platform similar to the ones back in Grable's 1000+, which has those same alien creatures riding on it. In that episode, they were actually speaking Korean, a good indication that they come from the crystal dimension, just like the rainicorns, and not from outer space. Back then, they didn't chase after the bride as she flew out into the black abyss. which I found really odd since they could have went after her if they were in spaceships. Turns out they're from Ooh, not from another planet, and they aren't technically spaceships, but sort of hovercrafts. Plus those crystal ships look a lot like the crystal eye of Gibbon, just like everything else around here. After the crystal creatures and the magic dog tried to attack the ice thing who's flying overhead, we leave the city behind and come upon two very familiar looking statues. They're old and crumbling, showing that they were built in a relatively ancient time. With a bit of a closer inspection, we can see these ancient stone effigies are Finn and Jake. Or perhaps the second is instead Germain, seeing as part of the statue has the broken words Finn and Jur on it. I'm not too sure why they would erect a statue to commemorate Germain instead of Jake, but there is the possibility that Germain does something later on that was monumental in helping Ooh. I'd also like to note that just before you see these statues, there's a small set of mountains in the background. I wanted to point it out because I'm sure that's the same exact location that we see Marceline at in the normal intro. Plus, we see Marceline's old home later on very close to this spot, and it seems deliberately placed there to support that theory. Back at the monuments, on top of the Jake/Germain figure, we see a tank sitting there, piloted by some kind of fire creature, likely a descendant from the Fire Kingdom. They seem to be living inside the statue itself, seeing as there's an opening at the ground level and a ladder hole at the top. Of course, since he's riding in a tank, he has to fire at least one shell. This travels right towards an unknown bystander that looks like a slime creature, who jumps into a small stone house? It has a tiny smokestack on it, so I can't answer everything, you know. Zipping past the explosion towards the cave, we see one of those crystal creatures hanging outside with a pair of binoculars just for a split second. A spy for Gibbon, there is no doubt. Here to watch the princess so she doesn't take his kingdom away. With that intro alone, there's enough intrigue to make an entire season of Adventure Time. There's so much they can do with the Pup Kingdom and the other kingdoms in general. Not to mention, Shermie seems like the reincarnation of Finn. For one, he acts like Finn in the earlier seasons, very hyperactive and headstrong. 2. Shermie's ears look like Finn's old hat. 3. He carries a satchel around that holds a bunch of items, just like Finn used to with his book bag. 4. Shermie wears the exact opposite colored shirt that Finn wore, red instead of blue. And 5. Finn once said back in episode Mortal Recoil, "I'm a cat! I'm an agile cat!" And Beth is like Jake, a physically strong dog who has special powers that helps out Shermie, just like Jake helped out Finn with the things he couldn't handle by himself. But even if Adventure Time doesn't get a sequel, or even another season, the open-ended stories really is the perfect way to conclude the show. Adventure Time wasn't a show about absolute answers, but about the adventure itself, and the growth of several characters we cared about and the situations they lived through. I'm reminded of the lyrics Marceline sang, "When you finally find it, you'll see how it's faded. The underside is lighter when you turn it around. Everything stays, but it still changes, ever so slightly, daily and nightly, in little ways, when everything stays." Ooh changes, but stays the same, slowly cycling through both old and new incarnations, destined to repeat itself like a reflection in a foggy mirror. Even the grass is toned down almost to simulate these lyrics. The color faded from its normal, brilliant and bright green. This world may have faded both metaphorically and literally, but there's still wonderful things here. A land of love, hate, friendship, isolation, jealousy, secrets, violence, and yada yada yada, you get the joke. But most of all, it's a land of adventure.